saying, I want to raise the cost of food to everybody in the United States. So thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman from California yields back. Gentleman from Washington reserves. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield as much time as he may consume. Mr. DeFazio, the ranking member of the subcommittee.
The gentleman is recognized for as much time as he wishes to use.
Here we are, day 2 of the House Committee on Natural Resources measures on the floor. Yesterday, we spent the entire afternoon debating, among other things, whether 435 members of the House were better suited to make decisions about individual Forest Service ranger districts' wildlife management programs or units of the National Park Service motorized recreation regulations overturning local managers. We were told that significant amendments, real amendments about real issues like the reauthorization of Land and Water Conservation Fund, they couldn't be offered because we need to respect the legislative process. Are we respecting the legislative process here today? This bill was introduced last week. No hearings have been held in the committee. No action was taken by the committee. It was written, introduced, and brought directly to the floor of the House of Representatives. That's respect for the legislative process. Now, despite everyone here knowing we're going to face the worst drought in American West that's seen in a century, the Committee of Jurisdiction has failed to hold even one hearing on current conditions. And in case you missed the news, here it is. California, driest conditions in over 500 years, extreme drought 70% of the state. Nevada and Oregon, my home state, severe to extreme drought in 80% of the state. Idaho, severe to extreme drought in nearly half the state. We should be thinking about how we're going to mitigate this, how we're going to fight the fires, what are we going to do for disaster relief. Shouldn't we be looking at reality as opposed to this piece of legislative theater? No. A number of us on the committee have asked for a hearing, a comprehensive hearing on all the aspects of this drought, and the majority has yet to respond. Now, this isn't a joke. And it's not something we should be playing political games with, seriously. You know, we have empty reservoirs, unemployed people, yes, tinderbox forests, fallowed fields, failing fisheries. That calls on us to be bigger and better than playing these stupid partisan games. That's what this is. Just like the bill yesterday. This bill is not a serious effort to legislate. It's going nowhere. The governor of California opposes it. Senator Feinstein opposes it. Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, New Mexico, and Oregon are all opposed to the provisions overturning state water law. The Party of States' Rights overturning state water law. The nonpartisan 18-governor-appointed Western States Water Council has opposed provisions in this bill overturning state water law. This bill is a chimera, in the real sense of the word, mythical beast, part lion, goat, serpent, all with the breath of burning flames. Here it comes. It's ugly, it's scary, but it is a fiction. It's not something real. And in Greek mythology, the chimera was defeated by a guy named Bellerophon, a great hero, mythical, but slayer of beasts. In this case, the U.S. Senate is going to replace Bellerophon. This is going nowhere. We're fiddling while our forests are going to burn this summer. The only way out of the current drought conditions is to make the skies open and rain. We aren't making rain today with this bill. We aren't even making law today with this bill. Cynical, embarrassing. We should pull this bill from consideration, actually work on something that will help not only those in California, but all of us impacted in the West by this drought. Let's hold a hearing on this drought. Let's form a task force and come up with real bipartisan solutions. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. Gentlelady from California reserves. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I am very pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Clintock, a member of the committee who has worked very hard on this legislation in the last Congress and this Congress.
Gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. California's drought is nature's fault, but our failure to prepare for it is our fault. In California, the ruling Democrats have not only obstructed the construction of new dams for the past 35 years, they've also actively sought to tear down existing ones. They've substituted conservation for desperately needed storage, and now that we face drought, we find that our few reservoirs are empty and our conservation options are already exhausted. Worse, in the first years of this drought, 1.6 million acre-feet of water was dumped into the Pacific Ocean for the care and amusement of the Delta smelt. 800,000 acre-feet, enough for 4 million Californians, was deliberately drained from our now empty reservoirs just several months ago, knowing that that water was desperately needed to support the threatened human population. Part of that water was taken from Central Valley farmers who now face economic extinction. This bill corrects these tragic policies. It's true we cannot make it rain, but we can take measures to stop this lunacy, increase storage capacity, reinforce existing water rights, and assure that we never again must face a crisis of this magnitude. This bill allows for the expansion of Lake McClure by 70,000 acre-feet. It gives local water agencies the ability to store additional water at New Melones. It sets deadlines for additional storage, and it authorizes local water districts to partner with the federal government to expedite expansion of existing reservoirs and construction of new ones. And it reverses the policies that put the Delta smelt ahead of the needs of thousands of farm workers and millions of consumers. Now, the people responsible for these policies say that this steals water from Northern California. It does not. This is only water that would otherwise be lost to the Pacific Ocean. This bill restores the bipartisan Bay Delta Accord that guarantees the Delta the water that it needs and grants a portion of any excess to the Central Valley. This historic accord was broken when Central Valley water was expropriated for the Delta smelt. This bill restores that accord while making provision to increase the overall supply. The other outlandish charge is the measure overrides state water rights. It does exactly the opposite. It specifically protects state water rights against infringement by any bureaucracy, local, state, or federal. We have listened to the environmental left for 40 years, and this is where it's gotten us. It's time we reject these voices and return to the common sense and proven policies of abundance that produced the prosperity that we once enjoyed. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Washington reserves. Gentlelady from California is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, may I inquire the amount of time left on both sides?
The gentlelady from California has 21.5 minutes.
And the other side? Both sides?
And the gentleman from Washington has 20.5 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now yield 3 minutes to Mr. Costa from Northern California.
Thank you very much.
Recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank the ranking member of the subcommittee for having an opportunity to speak on this measure. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of this bill, despite my reservations about the bill's prospects in the Senate. Over the years, I've supported a number of the provisions and goals within this legislation, but many of them will not offer much, if any, immediate relief unless we see biblical portions of rainfall taking place in California during the next 6 weeks. As California is in the midst of the worst drought on record, reservoirs are at record lows, and we have 13% of our average snowpack. People in my district deserve an effort that deals with the current realities that can offer help. No one has done more over 30 years working in Sacramento and in Washington to provide water not only for our valley but for the entire state and to ensure that we have a long-term supply. Unfortunately, too many folks on both sides of the aisle have kicked this can down the road. As much as I think a number of reforms in this bill are long overdue, some of the policy decisions have increased, frankly, the damage of the current drought conditions. We all have to recognize that in California and in western states today, we are in a triage situation. There are many things that we must do on the long term to increase our water supply and fix our broken water system in California. But immediately, we have to figure out how we can move water, this scarce resource, where it is, if in fact we do get some additional rainfall. This is not about political points. It's about mitigating the human impact of people living in 17 water districts that in 30 to 60 days will no longer be able to provide drinking water for themselves. New ideas, new immediate relief should be offered, not rehashing of the old political battles. Last week we saw what can happen in California when the entire Valley delegation, working together on a bipartisan basis with Senator Feinstein and Boxer, asked the Bureau of Reclamation to honor the carryover water that had been provided by those farmers who saved it in last year. And in fact, we were able to maintain that water this year. It's a lifeline. The Bureau and the administration heard our united calls loud and clear, and they made a fair decision to allow farmers in the Valley to keep water that otherwise would have been confiscated. But we need more of these kinds of efforts, which is why I offered an amendment yesterday to create a joint committee to bring us together to deal with these short and long-term challenges. This effort is important since right now we seem to be talking past one another and feuding over editorial pages across the state rather than finding the common ground that we need. Although leadership chose not to bring my amendment up for a vote, I think we have to be open to getting down to brass tacks at some point in time, because it's the only way we're going to solve these problems on a bipartisan basis. Solutions to our water problems are not and should not be partisan. Traditionally, they've been regional, and I can tell you where all the political fault lines lie. They're deep and they're historic. It's time for cooler heads to prevail. It's not about political points. It's about people who have lost their jobs. Mr. Speaker, I asked...
30 seconds,
The
Alalo.
gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you. This is not about political points. It's about people who could lose their jobs in the drought. It's about the dairy producer who might soon have to consider selling the dairy their grandfather started. It's about farm workers who might soon find themselves in food lines instead of helping produce some of the most productive crops in the world. It's about migrant children workers who might soon have to leave their school because their parents have to look for work elsewhere. In the coming days, we will be introducing legislation. I hope we can engender some bipartisan support, and at the end of the day, that's what it's going to take to solve the water problems in California. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from California reserves. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I am very pleased to yield 2 minutes to another member of the Natural Resources Committee and a Californian, Mr. Lamalfa from California. 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker.
Ask for 2 minutes.
I'm pleased to be able to rise in support of Mr. Valdale's bill, a bipartisan measure, it appears, and I'm glad for that. We were able to work together as neighbors, Northern California and Central California, to overcome the overreaching environmental restrictions that this bill seeks to do. It has diverted so much water away from San Joaquin Valley families for their farms, away from agriculture, away from productive use in favor of a 3-inch fish. Title IV of this measure ensures that Northern California cities and farmers maintain their first right to water from the areas of origin, the rivers in its area, which runs through their communities. I'm open to working with anyone at any time who has a realistic plan to address our historic drought. The minority has offered amendments that would do nothing to address this crisis. Indeed, their proposals would only put more roadblocks and more red tape between Californians and the water they need. We see plenty of potential for projects that could happen, such as Sites Reservoir in my neighborhood in Northern California, possibly the raising of Shasta Dam, other projects that would be very viable. Indeed, you look at this graph here, there's much potential that could be realized when 76% of the water that comes into the Delta flows straight out the Pacific. Only 24% actually either stays in the Delta or goes south of the massive amount of water that comes in to the Delta initially. The potential there for storing more water to have more available for everybody, whether it's farms, cities, or environmental use, can be realized by building projects, by removing the roadblocks that are unnecessarily there by bureaucracy or politics. We need to have a much better atmosphere of cooperating in this time of drought and putting our efforts forward to truly help Californians. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, we need to pass this bill today to take that step. Moses parted the Red Sea. I think we need to have somebody that can part the red tape that has held California up for so many years of building the water supply it needs. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Washington reserves. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now yield to the gentleman from California, Congressman Thompson.
Thank you.
Three minutes.
The gentleman from California, Mr. Thompson, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Chairman, I rise in strong opposition to this bill, a bill that would destroy jobs, does nothing to address the real problem, the drought, and ignores more than 20 years of established science. What's the bill do? Will this bill help alleviate the drought? No. Even if we pumped as much water as possible, Central Valley farmers still wouldn't have enough. There simply isn't enough water to go around. We're in an extreme drought, the worst in the last century. You can look at these photographs and see the snowpack in last year versus the snowpack this year. We're in bad straits, and it's a drought. It's not a man-made problem, it's a drought. Will this bill kill jobs? Yes. The Delta supports thousands of jobs in farming, fishing, and tourism, and has an economic output of more than $4 billion a year. This bill puts those jobs in jeopardy. Will this bill harm drinking water that millions of people rely on? Yes. When clean water is pumped south, the level of salt water in the Delta increases. People can't drink seawater. The entire state of California is in a drought. You saw it in today's USA Today. There are towns without water. There's more towns in line to lose all the water they have. And it's not due to a lack of pumping because of a quote-unquote little fish. It's due to the lack of snow and the lack of rain. Now, I know this is personal for many of my colleagues. It's personal for me, too. Many of the towns that I represent are running out of water. My hometown is rationing water, 65 gallons per person per day. It's a real serious problem. I understand the concerns of the Central Valley farmers. Ag is big in my district, too, and this drought is hurting my constituents as well. Because of these dry conditions, grapevines will experience an early bud this year, and without water to protect the early bud from the frost, we have no crops, out of business. But it's a drought that's causing the problem. Proponents of this bill say those who oppose it care more about fish than people. These comments cheapen the debate. They insult the intelligence of Californians and are not based on facts. As UC Berkeley professor of agriculture and resource economics stated in the paper today, Michael Heyman, he said you can kill every fish in the Delta and you still would have a real problem. Simply put, this bill is nothing more than a thinly veiled attempt to use this drought as an excuse to pump water from other users and to do so with zero regard for the people who depend on that water for their livelihoods. It would be more productive for this body to join in a rain dance on the floor today than to pass this bill. Our people, our constituents deserve better than this political-driven bill. They deserve solutions. I ask for a no vote on the bill.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentlelady from California reserves. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to yield 2 minutes to another gentleman from California, a former member of the Resources Committee, Mr. Calder. 2 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong support of the Sacramento-San Joaquin Valley Emergency Water Delivery Act. Albert Einstein is quoted as saying, "The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results." That just about sums up California's water policy today. Time and time again, we have let Californians down by diverting water away from our communities because of federal practices based on unfair priorities. California is headed toward an economic calamity unless meaningful action is taken. Ongoing drought conditions combined with regulatory restrictions have placed a tremendous strain on California water supplies. Today we're offering a first step to a solution to the devastating drought that California is facing. This is just not a California problem. The Central Valley of California produces a significant amount of our nation's crops. The devastation caused by this drought will reverberate through the country in the form of soaring food prices. Water officials across the state are taking responsible steps to ramp up conservation efforts and stretch every drop of water that we do have. Unfortunately, Congress and our federal regulatory agencies have failed to take a similar approach during these trying times. With our state facing an unprecedented water shortage, it is time for Congress to end the regulatory restrictions that are outdated and ineffective. Like many Californians, I'm tired of seeing millions and millions of gallons of water that could go to people in California instead of being dumped in the Pacific Ocean because of federal regulations that punish families, farmers, and the economy. It's been mentioned here, just last year, 800,000 acre-feet of water was flushed in the ocean during unprecedented rains. We should never be wasting that amount of water when people are suffering from drought. Today, the House can change that equation, restore balance between protecting the environment and providing water to the people who need it. I want to thank and commend my colleague David Valadao for his passion and leadership on this issue. He's been here only a short time, but he's already a tremendous impact on the Central Valley. I urge all my colleagues to support this bill. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Washington reserves. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
May I inquire the length of time left on both sides, please?
The gentlelady from California has 15 minutes, and the gentleman from Washington has 16.5 minutes. Gentlelady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield to the gentleman from California, Congressman Amy Barra. 3 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today to speak against this bill, and here's why. This bill does nothing to create additional water supplies. You know, the water that we've already lost, we can't get that back. What we need to do is look at ways to better manage the water we have and look at ways to better conserve that water. We're ready to do this. We're ready to work with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle as Californians. This isn't about Democrats versus Republicans. We can't pit one community against another. You know, you're talking about families. This is a picture of Folsom Lake in my district. 500,000 residents in our community rely on water from Folsom Lake for drinking water. It's not about a little fish. It's about when a child goes to turn on their tap, they get clean water coming out of it. This should be underwater. And if you want to understand how bad it is, let's look at this picture. This is the wet side of Folsom Dam. Where's the water? This bill takes water where it doesn't exist. You can't move water if it doesn't exist. So we stand ready to work with our colleagues in both houses and across the aisle to look at better ways for us to manage water, better ways for us to predict and weather forecast if you're going to have a dry season to protect that water, and better ways to serve all of California's communities. It can't be Northern California versus Southern California versus Central California. It's got to be Californians working together. Let's solve this. Let's work together. And let's create a brighter future for California by managing our water together. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. The gentlelady from California reserves her time, and the gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very pleased to yield 2 minutes to another former member of the Natural Resources Committee, Mr. Denham from California. 2 minutes.
The gentleman from California, Mr. Denham, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of the bill to ensure again that the House takes the lead in taking action about this big crisis that we're having in California's Central Valley. This measure puts a number of common sense ideas on the table to alleviate the severity of today's drought. There's need for federal response because California has a cross-cutting network of both state and federal water projects. With the passage of this bill, I hope the Senate will finally come to the table. If you don't like our idea, come up with one of your own. We have to have storage. We have to have conveyance. We need to plan for the future. There are times we have wet years, but if we don't store the water, we don't have it for drought years. It is common sense, and it should be bipartisan, and it should be bicameral. What I'm most proud about on this bill is that you actually have members from different regions of the state that have come together and said the time is now to finally come together on a solution for what we have and what we're facing today in California's Central Valley. So I'm thankful to Mr. Valadao for not only bringing this bill up, but for also including my provisions which will create some more water storage, including Los Vaqueros and Exchequer, and streamlining some construction projects. This bill also includes two of my bills, H.R. 2705, seeking to protect native salmon and steelhead on the Stanislaus River, and H.R. 2554, which would allow 100,000 new acre-feet of storage on New Maloney's Reservoir. We can do simple things to conserve more water. These two measures produce more water and alleviate pressure on supplies, and at no cost to the taxpayer. Yesterday, the Senate passed the Farm Bill, which we passed here last week. But without water in California, having a farm bill doesn't matter a whole lot if you can't plant the crops that feed the rest of the nation. I urge my colleagues to pass this bill. The time is now to have a real water solution. Again, if you don't like this one, then come up with one of your own. Let's have some water storage. Let's actually have a dialogue. But let's not shut down residents of the Central Valley or drinking water across the state.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Washington reserves. Gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from California, my colleague and great friend, Congressman Garamendi.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know if it's proper to ask you a question, but is this February 2nd? We're reminded of the movie Groundhog Day. We continue to repeat what happened yesterday and the year before. This is a repetition of a bill that came to the floor 2 years ago. It was a bill that had a lot of different pieces to it, but was very, very simple in what it accomplished, or attempted to accomplish, and that was to take water from someone, the environment, fish, and the Delta, farmers, communities, Contra Costa County, the East Bay of San Francisco, and deliver it to someone else. And that would be the San Luis unit of the Central Valley Project. It was 2 years ago. Must be February 2nd. Must be Groundhog Day because we're doing it all over again. Whatever little whistles and bells and bows you want to put on it, this is essentially a theft of water from someone to give to somebody else. Plain and simple. That's what it's about. In this case, the water is going to be stolen, and I use that word because that's accurate, from the Delta, from the environment, San Francisco Bay, from the salmon, which is a huge industry in California, all the way up the coast to Oregon, to be given to the largest single water district in the nation. A district that by its contract with the federal government is specifically set to take shortages in their water when there is a drought. This bill becomes law, that won't be the case. They'll get the water and someone else won't. Okay, we've seen this show before. We also saw before that this type of legislation, as does this bill, overturns the California Constitution, pushes it out of the way, and all this done by folks who normally call themselves state writers. Okay, well, this is the biggest grab of power by the federal government on water anywhere in the history of the reclamation law dating back to 1904. Never before has the federal government made such an attempt to grab the water rightfully belonging to a state and saying, you, in this case California, are going to use that water as seen fit by the federal government. Current water law and practices for a century and more have been the opposite. This doesn't solve the problem. We got a real problem. These have been seen before, and they're going to have to be seen over and over because that was a year ago. We turned it upside right, whatever, it's a lot of snow, right? That was a year ago. Snow in these Sierras. That's this year. No snow. And by the way, Central Valley looks pretty much like a desert. Not just the San Joaquin Valley, but the whole valley. We got a problem. We got a very real problem. And we really need a real solution. This bill isn't a solution. This bill is a call to arms. This bill is the clarion call of yet one more battle in the great California water war. And we're all veterans of that war. My colleagues over here on the Republican aisle, my colleagues over here on the Democratic aisle, we're veterans of the water war. Unfortunately, this bill doesn't solve the problem of California. There are solutions available, and we really need to get to them. We really need to sit down and work with a bill that passed the House and the Senate and signed by the President less than 2 weeks ago, the omnibus bill. In that omnibus bill, there is a restoration, a reauthorization of the federal drought emergency program that has some 16, 17 different provisions that provide for specific things that we should be funding. There's no money in this bill for funding. We're going to have to fund this. This is a West-wide problem, a problem that reaches across many, many states, and it's going to take all of us working together to help each individual state, each community, and every water district deal with a very real problem. But oh no, it's a battle, it's a call to arms, get to your barricades, pull out the old weapons. We really need a solid solution here, and unfortunately this bill simply doesn't do it. No time I presently have available.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from California reserves. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm very pleased to yield 3 minutes to the author of the legislation that passed this House in a bipartisan way last time, of which this bill emulates the gentleman from California, Mr. Nunez.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is about 40 years of policies that passed out of this body that took water from our region and sent it out to the ocean. That's what this debate is about. So the inconvenient truth for the folks on the left is that their 40 years of policies have resulted in people running out of water. One of the times they stole water was in 1992. After that, we had what were called the Bay Delta Accords. State-federal partnership, that was the last time we were supposed to give up water. It codified into law that agreement. So the gentleman was talking about stealing water. They're very good at stealing water. At the time they stole water last time, they said the accord was going to be the last time we were going to have water stolen from us. That was in 1994. But water continued to be stolen. And now there seems to be this misunderstanding about how the system works. L.A., Hollywood, San Francisco, it's a desert. They don't have water. They conveniently get their water from the Colorado River or from Yosemite Valley. They ignore all environmental rules. But they make our people that live in the San Joaquin Valley live by the rules that they don't want to live by. That's the reality. So we have these projects that are built for 5 years of storage and movement of water. So you can see when we had a drought in 97 and 91 and 2009, these were the allotments at those times. Last year, we actually didn't have real bad drought. Look at the allocation. So the system simply isn't being used. All the aqueducts, all the dams that were constructed and led by Democrats, of all people, Franklin Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy said this: "This is a fast trip, but if it had no other benefit than to permit us to look at this valley and others like it across the country, where we can see the greenest and most richest earth producing the greatest and richest crops in the country, and then a mile away see the same earth and see it brown and dusty and useless, and all because there's water in one place and there isn't in another." President Kennedy had the foresight to construct these projects that now, after 40 years of bad policies by the left, they've run the state out of water. They've run the state out of water. And meanwhile, they talk about killing fish. Well, why are they killing the fish? Because all of these cities that most of on the left represent dump their sewage into the delta that kill the fish. So stop dumping the sewer water in the delta if you care about the fish. If you care about the fish, give up your water in Yosemite National Park. Let that water go out to the delta to save the fish. Mr. Speaker, time for stealing water has ended, and that's what this bill does. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Washington reserved. Gentlelady from California.
Mr. Chairman, I reserve my time.
Gentlelady reserves. Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized for as much time as he wishes to use.
You know, this debate, Mr. Chairman, is very interesting, and what we are presenting here today and what is being presented by my California colleagues is from their point of view, a solution to a problem caused by a drought and caused by regulatory action in the state of California. And I've heard my colleagues on the other side of the aisle stand up. Virtually everybody has said this. I know my colleague, Mr. Garamendi, said something that I'll allude to in a moment. Mr. Costa said something about that. The ranking member of the Natural Resources Committee said something about what I'm going to say. And I dare say the gentlelady from California, Mrs. Napolitano, said the same thing. And the thread of what they all said is that there are solutions and we need to work together. We need to find these solutions. To which our side says, fine. This is our solution. We recognize you may not like it. We recognize that. But we also have one other point that we need to recognize, and that is the genius of our Founding Fathers created two branches of the legislative branch, the Congress, the House, in which we have the privilege to serve, and the Senate. I made the observation in my opening statement that the Senate has not acted on any water bill laws at all. Well, finally, somebody in this area is catching that message, because the Fresno Bee in California, which is right in the epicenter, if you would, of the San Joaquin Valley, editorialized last week that Senator Feinstein must step up and lead on the drought. Now, what that means, of course, is step up and write a piece of legislation. Now, I've heard my colleagues said, we're working on a piece of legislation, maybe by next week. Mr. Chairman, I want to make this point. This is very specific. Introducing a piece of legislation is not legislating. Legislating is when you pass a piece of legislation out of your respective house. And I think that's what the Fresno Bee is saying right here. When they tell Senator Feinstein and others that they need to step up on this, pass some legislation. Listen, I'm sure that legislation will be different than this. We've heard it from my colleagues on the other side. That's fine. I can take it, and I dare say my California colleagues can take it too. And then we can work out the difference. But we don't know what your position is. That is what is frustrating to us. So, Mr. Chairman, I think this is a good piece of legislation. The last Congress acted on it, and it should act on it again, and I reserve my time.
The gentleman from Washington reserves. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, may I inquire the balance of time on both sides?
Gentlelady has 8.5 minutes, and the gentleman from Washington has 9 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now turn over to Congressman from California, Mr. McNerney.
For how many
3 minutes.
3 minutes? Is it 3 minutes?
Yes, sir.
The gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Well, I thank the gentlewoman for yielding. I rise again to express my strong opposition to H.R. 3964. This legislation will do tremendous harm to the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, an area that I'm privileged to represent. Let's start with the facts. California is in a drought and is experiencing its driest year on record. Snowpacks are at about 13% of what they should be. Regions have set new records for consecutive dry days during the rainy season. 17 communities are at risk for running out of drinking water within 60 days. The National Drought Mitigation Center upgraded about 9% of California to an exceptional drought, the organization's most intense level of drought severity. Yet here we are again, spending time on a bill which, according to its authors, is only a short-term fix for a few communities and does nothing to help California in its water crisis. California's Natural Resource Secretary, John Laird, said that H.R. 3964, and I quote him, falsely holds the promise of water relief that cannot be delivered because in this drought the water simply does not exist. Let me repeat that. The water simply does not exist. Now, I know that the other side is going to vote unanimously for this bill. So I asked them to look and see what's inside of it. It's not in your interest. This takes away states' rights. This it does away states' protections. And I ask people who live in the Great Lakes area, people who live in the Florida Everglades level, pay attention. This is a federal precedent. It allows the federal government to come and take your water. Is that what you want? I don't think so. So I ask the members of the other side of the aisle, please consider what this bill contains. Please vote the right way. We should be addressing water efficiency, storage, reuse and recycling, water management, innovative water projects, and a long-term approach to water shortages. All H.R. 3964 ensures is that more water is shipped out of the Delta, turning this precious estuary into a salty, stagnant marsh, devastating local economy, and costing the Delta region thousands of jobs. We should stand united in preventing this legislation from ever becoming law, and I urge my colleagues to oppose H.R. 3964. Thank you, and I yield back.
Members are advised to address their comments to the chair, not to each other. And the gentlelady from California reserves. Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized for as much time as he wishes.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to respond to remarks that the previous speaker from California made about the potential danger in this bill as it relates to water rights in other states. What the gentleman was alluding to is absolutely incorrect, because the language in this bill is very specific. It is very specific as it relates to California. We went through this process in the last Congress when we went through hearings because other states, my states included, was very, very concerned if whatever preemption had to do with water here would affect other states. And in this bill, last year and in this bill, the language is very, very specific. It does not apply to other states. It is California-centric only. So I wanted to make that point, Mr. Chairman, and with that I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from California.
I continue to reserve my time.
Reserves. Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Chairman, if I could inquire of my friend if she has any more speakers, and if not, if she's prepared to close her side, prepared to close, I am prepared to close.
We have no more speakers, and I am prepared.
Then in that case, I will reserve my time so you can close, and we'll have one final speaker.
The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we've heard a lot of conversation about what's good and what's not good for my great state of California. We continue to stress we need to work together. Mr. Abera said that. Mr. Denham says create your own. Well, I thought this was the House of the people, that we are supposed to be working together. That's what we have such low ranking in the view of the American public, is we continually fight against each other. We need to sit in dialogue and be able to converse, at least agree on things that are necessary to be able to help our country back on its feet instead of fighting over what is not necessarily fightable about. Mr. Hastings, the chairman, talked about threat solutions, past legislation. Like anything else, we don't get information about many of the bills until last minute, and I cannot get any hearings on some of my bills, and neither can some of my members get hearings in the subcommittee or the full committee for being able to address some of these issues that have come up on water. In summary, we have, of course, this bill that repeals historic California water rights, overturns 20 years of environmental and conservation protections, ignores best available science, excuse me, repeals court orders, San Joaquin Restoration Settlement Act, preempts California state law, creates no new water. And for that, I'd like to enter a statement that the Executive Office of the President, Statement of Administrative Policy. Administration strongly opposes H.R. 3964, the Emergency Water Delivery Act, because it would not alleviate the effects of California's current drought and would disrupt decades of work that supports building consensus, solutions, and settlements that equitably address some of California's most complex water challenges. California is experiencing severe drought conditions and low reservoir storage. The urgency and seriousness of this situation requires a balanced approach that promotes water reliability and ecosystem restoration. It ends with, for these reasons, if the President were present at H.R. 3964, his senior advisors would recommend he veto the bill. Mr. Chairman, I urge my colleagues to vote no on this very dangerous precedent for not only my state of California, but for the rest of the nation, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back the remainder of her time. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I am very pleased to yield the balance of our time to the Majority Whip and a gentleman from California, from that part of California, Mr. McCarthy, the balance of our time.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank Congressman Valadao and Congressman Nunes and all the delegation for their work when it comes to water. The news from California is not bright. Current news, our drought is the worst in a century. Governor Brown has declared a state of emergency because of the drought. Our water storage is at near empty. Farmland is going fallow. Drinking water is threatened. The state actually says in the latest report that 17 communities can go dry in 4 months. In absence from God, our options are limited to ease this pain. It didn't have to be this way. But why are we here today and why are we debating this bill? Well, without action, farms are going to go fallow. So what does that mean for the rest of the nation? A lot of people don't look what happens throughout California and the Central Valley. Most of the produce is produced there for the nation and the world. If you just look at a few, 94% of all tomatoes, 93% of all broccoli, 89% of all carrots, 78% of all lettuce. So that means prices will go up. But it also means you're going to buy that produce somewhere else. You're going to buy it overseas. Maybe Chinese, maybe Mexico. What about the food safety? But more importantly, what about those jobs? What about those workers? Just a few short years ago, unemployment in some of these cities were 40%. It's already more than 10. The worst part of all this, it didn't have to be this way. We could plan for it. You know, I've heard colleagues talk about this, Mr. Chairman. That back in 1994, we actually had a bipartisan agreement, the Bay Delta Accord. And it's more than just Republicans and Democrats agreeing. It was environmentalists, farmers, water users. Everybody came to an agreement. But that bond was broken. The reason we debate this is water is so precious. Most of the snowpack comes from the north and travels down to the south. We have a state water project that, which is a little ironic, Governor Brown today, when his father was governor, built more than 50 years ago. There's always been allocations to send it down south. This year they made history. In the history of the water project, the allocation is zero. Zero. You know, when you're growing up, you're studying history. There's always those Aesop fables. Remember Aesop? He was that slave in ancient Greece that would tell these tales to teach about a moral lesson. One of those fables talked about the ant and the grasshopper, where the ant during summertime, because they knew winter would come, would go out and work hard and store food for the winter. Not the grasshopper. They would be idle out there in the summer and enjoying life, and hopefully nothing ever bad ever happened. Well, over the years, government regulation has made it harder. Government regulation has changed the Bay Delta Accord. Safe to say, environmentalists have sued. Environmentalists have decided that fish are more important than those who are unemployed. That maybe they come before the individual. And what does that mean? Since 2007, the State Water Project has lost 2.6 million acre-feet because of these policies. Now what does that mean, 2.6 million acre-feet? That means that is enough for the annual water needs of every resident in Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago combined. Where'd that water go? Out to the ocean. Why would we send it out to the ocean when we could store it for the drought that we knew would happen? There's nothing that illustrates this more of a broken system than just 3 years ago. You've all seen those photos that people have shown down here on TV of California when it had a snowpack and California today when it's all dry. But just 3 years ago, you know what that snowpack was? More than 170%. Boy, that would be a good year to be an ant. That'd be a good year to send it down. That'd be a good year to store for today so those communities would not go dry or that land would not go fallow. That wasn't the case. You know what the allocation was when we had 170% of snowpack? 80%. You know what's unjust in all of this? This year when we get 0% or then when we got 80% of allocation, the bill was always the same. You paid 100% regardless of what the allocation you got. What about property rights? What about responsibility? What about a broken system? So what does this bill actually do? Well, first and foremost, it puts families before fish. It goes back to an agreement that everybody agreed upon. And it moves us in a place where we can prepare. You know, standing defensively in the face of future droughts is not a noble gesture. It's actually insanity. Today, this House will act again. Because we would not be in the drier place that we are today had the Senate taken up the bill we acted on in the last Congress. Why? Because this House believes and understood and learned the lessons of the fables before. That we prepared. But the Senate, in the grasshopper style, stayed idly by. Our senators. California is pretty powerful in the Senate. Mr. Chairman, I will say California has 2 senators that are chairs of committee. There was an opportunity to act. And what's unique in this form of government of what we have, the greatest in the world, we have 2 houses. It doesn't mean both houses have to agree at the very beginning. It does mean that you take action and show where you stand, just like the House did 2 years ago. The Senate took no stance, so how do we know where they stand? Well, we will act again. The Senate needs to act, show us where they stand, go to conference, and stand up for the families of California. This has gone on too long. We do not have to be in the situation we stand today. There are families that will not have to be unemployed had we acted in the Senate based upon what we did. There are communities that will not have to go dry had we acted before. So enough of rhetoric, enough of the fights. The time is now. As the sun sets today, a bill will be out of this House. But still, nothing is even introduced in the Senate. Mr. Chairman, I implore, don't make California hurt anymore. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. All time for general debate has expired. Pursuant to the rule, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. It shall be in order to consider as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 113-34. That amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read. No amendment to that amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be in order except those printed in Part B of House Report 113-340. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report by a member designated in the report, shall be considered read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and opponent, shall not be subject to the amendment, and shall not be subject to the demand for division of the question. It is now in order to consider amendment number 1, printed in Part B of House Report 113-340. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek resignation?
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment made in order by the rule.
The clerk will designate.
Amendment number 1, printed in Part B of House Report number 113-340, offered by Mrs. Napolitano of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 472, the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Napolitano, and a member opposed. Each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment is to H.R. 3964 is very, very simple. It is an inconvenient truth, however. It creates a revenue stream to the Treasury by eliminating an irrigation subsidy, which requires irrigators to pay project debt with interest. I repeat, with interest. In other words, ending free taxpayer, repeat, taxpayer subsidy since 1902 that has been in place since reclamation was created. It requires that any new water contracts or renewed contracts must reflect the price of water with interest and repay the debt of the project to only Treasury with interest. This will be a small assistance to balancing our national debt. When reclamation was established in 1902, it was meant to deliver water to farms with approximately 160 acres, and in 1982 it was changed to 960 acres. Subsequent congressional action has changed, and so these with repayment contracts for these projects. Congressional action has also made repayment of project debt interest free. I repeat, debt interest free for irrigators, like while my municipalities, my constituents, my water people, and power users pay required appropriate interest. I repeat, debt interest free for irrigators while municipalities, cities, and power users pay required interest. Wish other state water users were as lucky as these folks. H.R. 3964 removes the role of federal government in protecting the environment and public good. That's not good. If we are removing role of federal government, then we should also remove federal subsidy associated with renewed or new water contracts. My constituents, as anybody else's, must fairly and equally repay additional interest on any project, and they have. For over a decade, Southern California foresaw needed infrastructure, and many local entities stepped up to the plate and provided some relief. We paid and constructed for new storage facilities like Diamond Valley Reservoir, entirely paid for by local groups without one federal cent, and adding 1 million acres of new storage. This is on top of the investments we've made in Title 16, Recycle Water, which is only a 25% federal match, which created 680,000 acre-feet in California alone. Let's end this interest-free subsidy at our taxpayers' expense. I repeat, let's end this free interest subsidy at all our America's taxpayers' expense. Eliminating this unfair subsidy will help to cut our deficit, and I urge all of my colleagues to vote yes on our amendment. And I would like to make a restatement about a statement that was just made on the Bay Delta. It seems that Secretary Babbitt and Secretary Resources were the ones who actually passed the Bay Delta Accord, and 3 years were spent by Mr. Garamendi trying to implement this, so I just want to set that for the record. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back the balance of my time.
Reserves the balance of her time. The gentleman from California is recognized. Purpose, the gentleman from California seek recognition.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to claim time in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, this amendment was rejected by a bipartisan vote of 174 to 250 when the gentlelady introduced it in 2012, and it deserves a similar fate on the floor today. Let's be clear about what it does. It singles out Central Valley Project participants who pay their federal loans off early to a punitive surtax that's imposed by on no other Bureau of Reclamation project in the United States. This surtax will be passed on to consumers through higher prices. Now, the Central Valley project was already singled out for a punitive tax, about $50 million annually, by Congress in 1992 to fund an array of environmental slush funds. I believe that beneficiaries should pay the cost of water projects, but they should pay only the costs of those projects and no more. These are not cash cows for the federal government to milk until they're dry. When the left speaks of corporate farms, they leave out the fact that virtually every family farm is incorporated, and that's who we would be singling out for this special tax. And that tax is then paid in only one of two ways: by employees through lower wages or by consumers through higher prices. I have a modest suggestion. Perhaps we should start putting people back to work rather than running them out of business. Now, I've often criticized the gentlelady and her colleagues for policies that have created the conditions that indirectly send water prices through the roof, but this proposal does so quite directly and dramatically. I think that's why so many of her colleagues on the Democratic side abandoned her 2 years ago, and why they would be well advised to do so again. And I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
How much time is there left, sir?
The gentlelady from California has 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, you know, we can go on debating the issue, but everybody that takes a loan has to pay interest, and I don't see any reason why since 1902 our irrigators have been singled out for not having to pay that, while the power marketing agencies and other water agencies do have to ante up that interest, and they do pass it on to the consumer. Excuse me, the consumer, but the consumer understands why. And we need to be transparent on the issue and be able to let people know what really we're paying for. And yes, we have the lowest price crop in California, but we must be able to ensure that we let the rest of the nation know why we need to move forward. The Central Valley project, CVP, it was $1.78 billion. Only $235 million have been repaid. 1.45 billion have not been repaid. Mr. Chairman, I think this is an amendment that is in order to begin trying to help balance our budget, and we hope that we will get our colleagues to understand that all of us have to hurt a little bit, and I don't see why this has not the merit that it should. I urge a yes vote. I return the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It ought to be obvious to everyone that once you've paid off a loan, you don't keep paying interest on that loan. Why? Because you've already paid